All right, so what's up with extraordinary endings? I'm actually talking about the last paragraph or page or whatever of your essay. And when you're doing a test, you don't really need this because you don't have time. This really is what happens in a longer essay that you have plenty of time to work on. And it is worth remembering that what most people remember about any essay or film or book or play or story is the first and the last parts of it. And there's been a lot of psychological studies that absolutely make this clear. And yet, students often treat the last few sentences like an exhausted runner kind of crawling across the finish line at the end of the marathon. There's this just get it over with kind of feeling. And it leaves a really bad, bitter aftertaste in the mind of the grader or the professor or the reader if you're not writing for professors. So, as always, you definitely need to restate your main points. This is, in an academic essay, absolutely crucial, so you need to restate that thesis. What I want to show you, though, is all the other things you can do once you've done that. So, number one is absolutely required in an academic essay, and you should never leave it out. But just restating the thesis is a little more dull than it needs to be. So, a second thing to do is to do what I call looping the ending. Book ending, as some authors will call it. I literally go back and I look at my introduction and my title and I say, okay, if I used a story for the introduction, how can I come back to that story? If I used a question for that introduction, how can I come back to that question? And not just to repeat it, but to put a little twist on it at the end. And it's a beautiful, delicious way to end things. You'll begin to see it everywhere in professional writing because all of us professional writers use that one all the time. The ending is also a fantastic time to come up with a really, really juicy, memorable key quote from the reading. My mama once said, "You better shop around," from a famous person in history or a famous media person. But the point is that just as in an intro, and a lot of these are linked to the intro, you can leave the reader really saying, "Wow, that was a fantastic quote." And leave them with a positive impression of your paper. Now, of course, it can't just be any quote. It has to link deeply to the thesis that you just restated. It's also a great time at the end to say, here's how my very carefully focused thesis applies to a wider range of topics now that I've done my academic duty and remained focused and steady and in depth. Here's all the other things that this could be applied to in the future or in a wider view. So it's like zooming out at the end. To show where you are on the planet, where you are in the world, where you are. You see that technique used by cinematographers all the time. Wonderful time to take a personal stand, to say this is what this means to me. And they say, so what, who cares? And this is really the place to say, so what, who cares? And you can use a personal voice at this point, even if you're otherwise being very academic and objective. You can also address the reader directly and say, so how are you going to put these principles that I've just demonstrated in my thesis to work, including how are you going to put these top 10 tips to work in your next essay? That's what I want to ask you. As I mentioned, the ultimate question, so what, is a great question. I love asking myself this at the end of something that I've written to say, hey, Scott, so you wrote this whole thing about, I don't know, Lake Tahoe, or this whole thing about Paris, or this whole thing about how to write academic essays. So what? Who cares? And answering that question can be very, very powerful. It's also a great time to recognize that you might have multiple audiences. And you can actually say, if you're a female, this is what my thesis means to you. If you're a male reader, this is what my thesis, I'm just making this up, but if you're a male reader, if you're an older reader, if you're a younger reader, if you're a skeptical reader, if you're a reader so you can actually call out different audiences, just as I have to note that my top 10 tips need to work in multiple situations. No matter what you do, you need to add some new fascinating comparison, fascinating fact. No matter what you do, don't leave them yawning. Don't let the professor or the reader get to the end of the essay and go, oh, yawn, oh, what was that paper about? What you want them to do at the end is say, wow, that was an amazing essay, hopefully from start to finish. But at least at the finish, you want that wow. As Mae West once snarled, I love being looked over, but I hate being overlooked. And you don't want your essay to be overlooked. So let's see what you can do with the ending of your next amazing essay.